Hey everyone! Tonight we're stepping into a house where the lights are low, the air is cold, and a mother is about to hear the kind of truth that splits a life clean in two. You might not survive this one, not because it's frightening in the loud way, but because some betrayals arrive on tiptoes, soft as breath, and somehow cut the deepest. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And while you're settling in, tell me your city and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone gathers from. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise. And let's begin tonight's journey together. I was supposed to be halfway to Jacksonville by the time this happened, feet up, seatbelt digging into my hip, squinting at the tiny bag of complimentary crackers. Instead, I was standing in my own hallway, suitcase still tagged with a bright orange priority sticker, listening through a half-closed door as my son discussed turning me into a legal non-person. If Mom can't remember things clearly anymore, Spencer said, no one will blame us for applying for guardianship. He spoke so casually, like he was deciding whether to buy almond milk or regular. Meanwhile, my heart did this little stutter step, the same way it used to when I'd catch Arthur leaving the garage door open overnight. But this wasn't a forgotten garage door. This was my son, the boy who once cried if I left the room, preparing to sign papers that would let him decide when I eat, where I live, even what medications I take. And standing beside him, with her silk voice and careful posture, was Naomi. Attorney Carr said if we file early, she murmured, she won't be able to pull back the assets. Assets? Not my home, not my savings, not the things Arthur and I built over 40 years, just assets. I pressed my back to the wall to steady myself. Old age wisdom moment when the ground shifts under your feet. You don't scream, you find something solid to lean on, even if it's just drywall. My first instinct as a mother was ridiculous and pure step-in. Ask Spencer if he wanted tea. Pretend this conversation was a misunderstanding, maybe low blood sugar talking. But the archivist in me, the woman who spent 3 decades cataloging truths no one wanted to misplace, she whispered something else. Record this. So I slid my hand into my pocket, opened my phone, and hit record. Fun, quirky fact. Wisconsin allows one-party audio consent. That means as long as I know I'm recording, the law doesn't care who else is talking. I'd once taught that to a group of 3rd graders on museum tour day. Never thought I'd use it to protect myself from my own family. Spencer flipped pages, paper on paper, a legal pad, maybe. Naomi's voice dipped. We just need behavioral notes. Forgetting the day, misplacing mail, little things. Well, if forgetting the day disqualifies someone, half the population is in trouble. I once walked into a store on a Wednesday swearing it was Monday. You can call it aging, but if we're honest, the academically debatable phrase time as a social construct starts making a whole lot of sense after 60. I stepped back, breath held tight in my chest. My suitcase sat by the door exactly where I'd dropped it an hour earlier. That bright priority sticker felt like a joke now. My flight wasn't going anywhere, not until I understood just how far this scheme reached. I walked quietly toward the kitchen. The house creaked like it always does in winter, the wooden floors expanding and settling like old joints. I opened the oak china cabinet, my favorite piece in the house. Arthur and I bought it in '87 from a retired librarian who insisted it was older than Wisconsin itself. Behind the dishes, behind a false wooden panel, was a fireproof safe no one but Arthur and I ever knew existed. The key lived inside the pocket of his old raincoat. The fabric had molded around it, the way long marriages mold around routines. My hand shook only a little as I turned the key. Inside was Arthur's original will. Not the version Spencer kept in his files, not the digital copy he reviewed for accuracy. The real one, signed in his careful blue ink, and in the margin, because Arthur never did leave a document untouched, was a handwritten note. Do not grant full authority to our son without an independent evaluation. Loretta must be the final approval. I exhaled so slowly it felt like prayer. People talk about signs from the universe. I don't know about the universe, but this ink, This paper felt like Arthur reaching through time to tap my shoulder and say, "Loretta, pay attention." I slipped the envelope into my bag, shut the safe, and tiptoed toward the front door. Behind me, Spencer was still talking to Attorney Carr. Capacity assessment first, bills, meds, anything she forgets, write it down. Funny, I hadn't forgotten bills, or meds, or where I'd put my keys. In fact, the only thing I'd forgotten lately was how dangerous it is to assume your child will never see you as a burden. I stepped outside. The Wisconsin wind slapped my cheeks, sharp and metallic good. I needed the sting, needed to stay awake. My suitcase was still in the trunk. I locked the car door, sat behind the wheel, and turned off the GPS map that was still trying to lead me to the airport. "No," I whispered to myself. "Your trip isn't to Florida anymore. Your trip starts right here." And with Arthur's will in my bag and the recording on my phone, I drove toward the only place in the city where truth is never lost, the museum. Because tonight, I wasn't a confused old woman. Tonight, I was the custodian of my own life. When I pulled into my driveway that night, the porch light flickered with the same uneven glow it's had for years. Arthur always meant to fix it. But he used to say, "A little flicker never hurt anybody. It just lets the house breathe." I stepped inside with that same breath catching in my throat. The plane ticket peeking out of my purse felt like a reminder of the life I almost let myself drift into. A simpler one, away from this storm. But storms don't blow over by running, they settle only when someone stands in the middle of them. Tonight, that someone had to be me. My suitcase sat by the door, still zipped, still neat, still expecting Florida sunshine. I bent down and touched the handle. "Sorry, sweetheart," I whispered to the poor suitcase, "but the only sand under my feet tonight is Wisconsin road salt." That was my first small joke of the evening. Sometimes humor is the only glue, keeping a woman from cracking. I walked deeper into the house, switching on lights one by one, each room greeting me like an old friend who sensed something was wrong but didn't dare ask. In the kitchen, that familiar hush held steady. The clock ticked above the doorway. Snow tapped softly at the window. For a moment, the silence felt like a witness. Maybe it always was. I went straight to the china cabinet, the old oak one, where Arthur insisted we store everything except china. "Dishes belong in dish cabinets," he'd said. "This one's for secrets." That always made me laugh, and honestly, it still does. Who knew the man was so prophetic? I reached behind the second row of plates, slid my fingers along the back panel, and felt the tiny latch. Click. The soft sound of a safe opening is strangely comforting, like the house whispering, "Go on, Loretta, you're doing the right thing." Inside lay the envelope, thick, untouched, Arthur's handwriting on the front, looping and steady, a handwriting you only get if you grew up before keyboards stole all the romance away. I held it in both hands because something about it felt sacred. Paper isn't just paper when the person who wrote it no longer breathes. It becomes a kind of time capsule, holding on to the parts of them you can still touch. I slipped the envelope into my bag and locked the safe again. And there it was, my old age insight for the night people think wisdom comes from what you remember, but more often it comes from what you finally stop ignoring. I didn't know it yet, but that line would save me again and again. Back in the car, the engine hummed low as I drove through the quiet streets of Madison. Porch lights glowed, chimneys smoked. Somewhere a dog barked as if announcing my passing. I felt like I was floating through my own town as a stranger, watching a world that didn't yet know a mother had just gathered evidence against her own son. The museum's brick building rose ahead, tall and warm-colored under the street lamps. I parked in my old spot, the one nobody ever took, out of habit or respect. I could never tell. Maybe both. My breath fogged the air as I walked to the rear entrance. The security guard buzzed me in without hesitation. "Evening, Miss Loretta," he said. "Evening," I whispered back, just tying up a loose thread. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old maps, paste glue, and thyme, a scent you won't find bottled. Though if someone ever made a perfume called Historian's Dream, this would be it. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Some archivists swear that paper made before 1950 carries molecules from the air of its original decade. That means every time I open an old journal, a little bit of 1912 or 1934 slips into modern oxygen. Isn't that something? I flicked on the green desk lamp at my old workstation. That little circle of warm light made everything feel grounded again. I set Arthur's will on the table and read each line slowly. His voice echoed behind every sentence. Loretta should have the final decision. Do not allow unilateral changes. Protect her judgment with independent verification. There it was. Arthur had seen what I refused to see. I traced my finger along the margin, feeling the indent where his pen pressed harder. He always did that when something mattered. When I finished, I sat back, heart steady, not shaking for the first time all day. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't the beginning of a fight. This was the continuation of one Arthur started for me years ago. Trusting I'd know what to do when the time came, I let out a breath, one long enough to feel like I was exhaling 6 years of widowhood. I turned to the scanner, powered it up, and laid the first page under the lid. The machine whirred to life. It sounded like an old friend waking up, stretching, saying, Well, you're back to your tricks. I see. That was my second little joke, don't worry. I've got one more before the night ends." As the scanner captured each page, I labeled the files with the same precision I taught every intern who passed through my department. Clear, clean, chronological, no flourishes. Evidence likes its room tidy. Halfway through, I caught myself whispering the academically debatable phrase for this part. In the end, memory is just organized proof. Some historians argue with that. I don't. I think memory needs companions' dates, ink, signatures, so people can't twist it into whatever shape suits them. By the time I finished scanning, the snow outside had thickened into soft veils across the glass. I placed the original will in a protective sleeve and tucked it deep inside my bag. With the lights dimmed, the museum glowed like a sanctuary, a safe haven, maybe the only one I had left. As I walked out, the building hummed behind me quiet, but not silent. I swear it knew what was happening. Maybe places do hold memories. Maybe walls listen more than people do. Third joke of the night, if these walls ever decided to gossip, there'd be scandals in 3 counties. I drove home slowly, letting the cold wind clear the last fog of heartbreak from my mind. When I parked under the maple tree, I sat for a moment, watching my breath rise and fall. One night ago, I was a woman overhearing her son discuss her like a burden. Tonight, I was a woman reclaiming her place in the story. And tomorrow, I would take the next step. But for tonight, the evidence was safe. I woke up the next morning with the kind of clarity that doesn't feel like courage. It feels like instinct. The house was quiet. Snow still pressed against the windows, and the air held that early morning chill that makes a person breathe deeper just to feel alive. I sat on the edge of my bed, rubbing my palms together, telling myself what I already knew today wasn't about confrontation. Today was about performance. I'd spent 30 years cataloging history, but now I was stepping into a new role, an actress inside my own life. Strange how survival sometimes requires you to pretend weakness when you're standing on stronger footing than ever. There's an academically debatable phrase that floated through my mind. Sometimes power looks like surrender. I didn't know if scholars agreed. I didn't care. Today, it was true. I wandered into the kitchen and deliberately placed the cereal box in the fridge, then left the milk on the counter, even threw a dish towel in the pantry for good measure. Anyone watching would think my brain had sprung a few leaks, but I wasn't performing for anyone yet, not until Spencer arrived. Before he did, I positioned a tiny recorder behind the vase on the dining table, one of those little black cubes I used during oral history interviews. I slid another into the pocket of my cardigan, tucked neatly behind the seam, tape everything, not because I wanted drama, but because I needed proof. My quirky fact of the day: archivists used to hide microphones inside hollowed-out books when collecting sensitive testimonies. I always thought that was excessive until now. Turns out, paranoia and preparedness are cousins wearing different hats. At 10:17 a.m. sharp, Spencer's car rolled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window. He always parked crooked when he was stressed, tires tilted slightly toward the lawn, as if he couldn't commit to either road or home. Today was no different. He knocked twice, short taps. Then he let himself in. Mom, he called softly. I responded with my first light joke of the day. If you're coming to arrest me for improper cereal storage, give me a minute to fix my hair. He walked into the kitchen with that half-concerned, half-calculating expression I used to mistake for love. Now I saw it for what it was, strategy. His eyes landed on the cereal in the fridge. Mom, he said gently, this isn't where this goes. Oh. I blinked, feigning confusion. Well, I suppose my brain's off on a holiday without me. He smiled sadly, the kind of smile you give someone you think you're above. It's okay. These things happen. I leaned on the counter, playing into it. Happening more lately, I suppose. He stepped closer. That's why I'm here. I want to help you. You shouldn't have to manage everything alone. Old age insight floated into me. People rarely offer help without deciding you're incapable first. My grandmother used to say that whenever someone insisted on doing chores she hadn't asked for, hadn't. Spencer motioned toward the dining table. Why don't you sit down? Let me go through your mail. You mixed up a few things last month. I pretended to hesitate, lowering myself into the chair. He picked up envelopes deliberately, sorting them into piles with exaggerated patience. This is your water bill, and this is a charity flyer. And this, Mom, why did you put your Medicare statement with junk mail? I shrugged lightly. Oh, maybe I wasn't paying attention. My mind wanders. He looked at me over the top of the papers. That's what I worry about. And just like that, he fed the recorder his first piece of manipulation disguised as concern. I almost wanted to thank him. He continued, Mom, I think we should consider organizing your finances together, just to keep things streamlined. Streamlined, I repeated softly, like a woman accepting her weakness. Maybe that would help. He softened his voice, sweet, gentle, calculated. I just want what's best for you. Second joke of the day, well, if what's best for me involves someone else doing tax season, sign me up. He chuckled, relieved to see me taking the bait. I wasn't taking it, I was feeding it back to him. Let's go over your medications, he said next. I brought a weekly pill box. The one you use now is too complicated. It wasn't. I'd organized pill boxes for museum volunteers with more prescriptions than a pharmacy. But I opened the new box, fumbling slightly, enough to let him think his plan was working. He leaned in, placing a hand on my arm. Mom, I know this is hard to admit, but things are changing. I let my gaze drift to the window, pretending discomfort. Yes, I suppose you're right. He sighed with rehearsed sadness. I've been talking with Attorney Carr. She thinks it would be good for us to establish some legal protections. There it was, the pivot, the careful slide toward guardianship. I swallowed quietly. Legal protections like what? Oh, nothing major, he said lightly, flipping through my mail again. Just paperwork, something to ensure your well-being. My voice trembled on purpose. Spencer, I'm not losing my mind. He paused. I never said you were. But you think I am? He softened again. Mom, you put cereal in the fridge. I laughed, small and cracked. Well, at least it'll stay cold. That was my third joke. Humor can soften suspicion better than any lie. Spencer squeezed my shoulder. I love you. I just want to help you before things get worse. And there it was, the moment I felt the recorder capturing not just words, but intent. A son framing his mother's future with quiet pressure. He stood, stretching his back. I'll come by tomorrow. We can continue sorting things. I nodded slowly. All right. When he left, the door clicked shut with a soft finality. I waited a full minute before moving. Then I reached behind the vase, retrieved the recorder, and pressed stop. The tiny LED blinked like a heartbeat. Proof, clear, calm, and clean. Not a confrontation and not a tear, just evidence. And that was the moment I realized something important when you stop panicking. People show you who they really are. And my son had just shown me everything. The next morning, I moved through the house with a kind of calm that didn't match what was happening. Calm is a funny thing. It doesn't always come from peace. Sometimes it comes from preparation. I ladled warm vegetable soup into a pot, letting it simmer until the kitchen smelled like comfort and strategy blended together. If Spencer wanted to play caregiver, I'd hand him the perfect stage for it. I placed the recorder carefully inside the ceramic sugar jar this time. The lid had a tiny chip on one side. Arthur once called it character, which is the nice way of saying, I dropped it, but don't tell your mother. That little chipped lid would help the microphone breathe. Amazing how useful old accidents can become. Around noon, Spencer texted, on my way, bringing you lunch. Of course he wasn't bringing me lunch. He was bringing me the next chapter of his plan. He walked in with a paper bag from a cafe across town. Mom, he said warmly, I brought your favorite tomato basil. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head like a dutiful child who just earned a sticker. I know cooking gets tiring. I gestured at my simmering pot. Well, I figured soup is easier to burn than my house. That was my first joke of the day, and it made him laugh more than it deserved, which told me he was nervous. He placed the cafe bag on the table, then lifted the lid of my soup pot. This smells great. Mom, you didn't have to cook. I like cooking, I said, giving the spoon a slow stir. Makes the house feel alive. Old age wisdom floated in right on cue. A kitchen will always tell you whether a home still has a heartbeat. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely as if he wanted to look casual, but his shoulders stayed just a touch too tight. Well, I thought maybe we could eat and talk. Talk about what I asked softly, playing clueless. Oh, nothing dramatic, he said lightly. Just thinking about your future. Maybe simplifying some things. That word simplifying rang like a bell. People love pretty synonyms when they want power. Simplify, streamline, protect. They never say control or take or claim. Those words are too honest. He picked up a bowl and ladled soup into it, testing the temperature with the spoon like a proud caretaker. Then he carried the bowl to the table and sat across from me. Posture gentle. Smile soft. I was looking at places yesterday, he said. Some retirement communities, cozy ones, with activities you'd love. I blinked slowly. Places. He nodded, voice warm and coated with sugar, just exploring options. I want you somewhere safe, somewhere supervised. Oh, I said, lifting my spoon. Do they have supervisors who also do taxes? Because if so, where do I sign? He snorted. My second joke earned a real laugh that time, but then he softened. Tone deliberately sympathetic. Mom, it's not that you can't take care of yourself. It's just, you shouldn't have to. These places help with medication, meals, transportation. You won't have to worry anymore. He said all of it so sweetly, as if imprisonment could be served warm with croutons. I took a small sip of soup, but I like my home. I know, he said quickly, but homes come with responsibilities. Places like this free you from all that. There it was, the word free, used backwards. I pretended to mix my soup, swirling the spoon slowly. Do they have gardens? I'd miss my herbs. Yes, he said, and you wouldn't have to manage them. Staff could help. The recorder inside the sugar jar was catching every carefully curated syllable. He took another bite, then added something new, something bold. Plus, moving sooner rather than later would help me take care of your financial paperwork. Naomi and I can start organizing things so everything's well streamlined. Streamlined, I echoed softly, staring at my bowl. That's the second time you've used that word. He chuckled. Well, you know me. I like structure. That wasn't structure. It was scaffolding for control. And structure only ever becomes dangerous when someone decides to build walls around you. I set my spoon down gently. Spencer, do you think I'm slipping? He looked at me with false compassion. I think you're overwhelmed. Things have been harder lately. You forget things, misplace things. You were confused last week about the date. I kept my voice small. Everyone forgets dates. He tilted his head. Not like this. Here's where a quirky fact floated through me like a lifeline. Studies show people misremember the day of the week more often when they're bored than when they're cognitively impaired. Isn't that something maybe monotony should be the one filing guardianship? Not me. I stirred my soup, letting silence thicken. It drew him in exactly the way I hoped. He softened further. "Mom, I'm not trying to take anything from you." Ah, there it was. The sentence every guilty person eventually says. I whispered, "I know you're trying to help." He relaxed, mistaking submission for agreement. "That's why moving makes sense," he said. "Naomi found a place in Oak Ridge that's quiet, safe, and close to us. If you're there, we can visit all the time." Oak Ridge. I knew Oak Ridge. It wasn't a retirement community. It was halfway to being a memory warehouse. People didn't live there. They waited there. Quietly. Slowly. I nodded faintly, playing along. "Maybe you're right." His relief washed over him so visibly it almost made me pity him. "That's all I want," he said, "just to make sure you're secure." That word again, secure. People also use that when locking things away. He finished his soup, smiling warmly. "I'll bring brochures tomorrow. We can make a plan." I forced a smile. "All right." He gathered the dishes and rinsed them in the sink, humming softly like a man preparing for a victory he'd already counted. And the whole time, the sugar jar listened. When he left, I waited until his car pulled out of the driveway, then I lifted the ceramic lid, pressed stop, and the tiny recorder blinked like a heartbeat made of truth. I held it in my hand and whispered, "This time, Spencer, you won't rewrite the story." The morning after the soup conversation, I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in a blue-gray hush. There's a certain kind of quiet that comes before you make a life-changing decision, like the world is holding its breath with you. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped together, listening to the winter wind push gently against the window. Today wasn't for pretending. Today was for protecting. I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out my old leather notebook. Arthur once teased me for writing everything down. One day, he'd say, "Your lists will have lists." He wasn't wrong. This notebook had more bullet points than a detective's case file. But today, the pages wouldn't hold recipes or retirement plans. Today, they'd hold strategy. By 8 a.m., I was bundled in my wool coat, scanning the frost-covered driveway. The museum work had given me the facts. Now I needed law. And there was only one person I trusted enough to help me without letting sentiment blur the truth. Attorney Marisol Vega. She was younger than me by a few decades, but had the kind of presence that made judges straighten their robes. Sharp-minded, steel-spined, gentle when necessary. A rare combination, and she was the only lawyer I knew who didn't flinch when older clients insisted they were still sharp. Instead, she listened. I drove slowly through Madison, the cold morning sunlight glinting off the snowbanks like powdered glass. When I reached her office, the lobby was warm, smelling faintly of cinnamon and toner. Her assistant ushered me in immediately as if they'd been expecting me. Marisol looked up from her desk with a soft smile. "Loretta, I thought you were supposed to be on a beach right now." I exhaled. "Well, I decided sunscreen could wait. Crisis could not." "That sounds concerning," she said gently. "Sit. Tell me everything." So I did. Not just the parts with Spencer and Naomi speaking behind closed doors, but the soup conversation, the recorder, the subtle shifts in his tone, the brochures for Oak Ridge. She didn't interrupt once, didn't gasp, didn't offer quick fixes. She simply listened, nodding occasionally, her dark eyes sharpening with each detail. When I finished, she leaned back, fingers steepled. "Loretta, what they're doing isn't just morally wrong, it's legally dangerous. And you're right to act now. You're not overreacting." A weight slid off my shoulders with that sentence. It's funny, sometimes it takes someone else's clarity to confirm your own sanity. Marisol continued, "The first thing we need to do is revoke any authority Spencer already has. Do you have any existing power of attorney documents?" I nodded. "Arthur drafted one 7 years ago. Spencer was listed as financial POA." Marisol sighed. "That needs to go." She drafted the revocation papers with swift precision, sliding forms toward me across the desk. "Sign here and here. This removes his legal authority immediately. The revocation will be filed statewide within hours." I signed, the pen steady in my hand. "Good. That's one layer." "Yes," she said, "but you'll need more than one." She reached for a new stack of forms. "Next, We update your will. The version you have is still valid, but outdated. We'll modernize it. Add safeguards. Specify independent oversight. Reinforce your autonomy. Arthur would approve, I whispered. She smiled gently. Arthur was a smart man. He gave you the blueprint. I nodded. My quirky fact of the day floated in right then in certain archives. A single handwritten note in the margin can change the historical interpretation of an entire document. And that's exactly what Arthur had done. His little blue ink scribble was the hinge on which my whole defense now swung. Marisol handed me a fresh legal pad. Tell me exactly what you want. What happens to the house, to your museum items, to personal belongings? I wrote slowly, deliberately, not from fear, but from clarity. Every sentence was a small reclaiming of space. When I finished, she read over it. This is strong, fair, and very protective. Good, I whispered. I don't intend to be erased. She leaned back again, finally. We need something definitive. Something not even Spencer can twist. She tapped her pen lightly against her notebook. A medical capacity statement from a licensed cognitive specialist. I nodded. I already planned for that. She raised an eyebrow. You did. I smiled faintly. A historian never goes into battle with only one source. That's the academically debatable phrase of the day. Some say one source is enough. But anyone who's ever lived knows two is better. She laughed softly. Loretta, you may be the only client I've ever had who uses archive methodology to defend herself. Well, I shrugged. It's worked this long. She organized the documents into a neat stack. This is your legal armor. Revocation of power of attorney. Updated will with safeguards. Independent medical evaluation. Official documentation of your capacity. Recorded evidence of coercion. 5 layers, I whispered. That sounds sturdy. It is, she said. By the time Spencer attempts anything formal, he'll hit a wall made of your rights and his own guilt. I let out a shaky laugh, light joke number 2. Well, I always wanted my legacy to be strong. Didn't think it would involve so much paperwork. She stood and placed a hand gently on mine. Loretta, you are not alone, and you are not powerless. That was the 3rd light joke moment, and here I thought retirement meant fewer legal battles. She chuckled, only the exciting ones, after signing everything. I placed the stack in my bag alongside Arthur's will. My bag felt heavier now, not in a burdensome way, but in a fortified way, like carrying armor stitched from ink and truth. As I walked back out into the cold, the sunlight felt brighter. The world looked sharper, edges clean and crisp. I wasn't afraid anymore. Driving home, I thought about how odd it is the way children imagine their parents grow weaker with age. But sometimes age sharpens the parts of us that matter most. Experience, intuition, steadiness. Old age insight for the day. Strength doesn't leave a woman just because her birthday numbers go up. In fact, sometimes it grows louder. By the time I reached my driveway, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Spencer had built his scheme on sand. I had built mine on stone. The next morning arrived with a thin layer of frost over everything, like the whole world had been dusted with cold sugar. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea warming my palms, feeling the mixture of nerves and determination braiding themselves inside my chest. Today was the day I traded performance for proof, not staged confusion, not careful acting. Today I would stand as myself, clear-minded and steady, and let a licensed professional say what I already knew. I pulled on my gray coat, the one with the loose button I kept forgetting to fix. Arthur always said it made me look scholarly, which was his sweet way of saying it made me look like a librarian who'd lost her thimble. I added my old leather notebook to my bag, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the quiet morning. Dr. Quinn's clinic sat on the edge of Madison, a soft-bricked building with a row of pine trees behind it. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. Inside, the receptionist looked up with a bright smile. Mrs. Hayward. Yes, I said. Here for the cognitive evaluation. She nodded and handed me a clipboard. Dr. Quinn will be with you shortly. As I filled out the form, I couldn't help noticing how odd it felt signing my name to prove to someone that I could still sign my name. But that's the thing about evidence. It doesn't exist because you doubt yourself. It exists because someone else thinks they can rewrite you. After a few minutes, the door opened and Dr. Quinn appeared, a tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun and soft, intelligent eyes behind thin-framed glasses. She had the calm air of someone who knew how to separate panic from truth. "Loretta," she said warmly, extending her hand, "come on back." Her office smelled faintly of peppermint and old books, two things that have never lied to me. I sat in the chair across from her as she clicked her pen and opened the evaluation folder. "I understand this exam was your idea," she began. "Yes," I said, "because my son has concerns, and I'd rather address reality than let him define it." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "I respect that." She flipped to the first page. "We'll begin with a standardized assessment memory, reasoning, orientation. Nothing invasive. We'll just talk." Talking I could do. I'd been doing that since I was 2. According to my mother, my second light joke slipped in right there. "Don't worry, Doctor. I've been telling stories for 70 years. You may need to tap out before I do." She chuckled. "We'll see." We started with basic orientation questions, month, year, day. I answered easily. Then she moved to short-term recall, 5 words I repeated back immediately. Then again, after a few minutes, that part reminded me of the museum interns who used to forget half the archive passwords. At least I was outperforming a room of 20-year-olds. Next came drawing a clock. I sketched the circle, added the numbers, drew the hands pointing to the time she gave. "Perfect," she said. "Most people put the numbers on the wrong side." "Well," I said, "I've been telling time longer than you've been handing out clipboards. Light joke number 3, Dr. Quinn smiled. Then came reasoning tasks. Simple math, word patterns, problem solving. She watched me closely, not with suspicion, but with professional curiosity. About halfway through, she paused. "Loretta, you're moving through these quickly. Feeling all right?" "I feel capable," I said. "I feel like myself." She nodded. "It shows." There was a moment of silence as she jotted notes. I took that moment to absorb the room, the diplomas on the wall, the framed photo of her hiking with 2 grown children, the ceramic mug labeled Brain Boss. The space felt safe, grounded, clear. This was where truth lived, and I belonged here. She moved into the final part of the test interpretation. "I'm going to read you a short scenario," she said. "Then you tell me what you think is happening underneath the surface." She read a paragraph about a woman receiving help she didn't ask for. I smiled faintly. "Sometimes help is just control wearing a polite hat." She wrote something down. "Insight excellent." Then she said, "Last question, why did you choose to come here today?" This wasn't part of any booklet. This was a human question. I folded my hands in my lap. Because I spent 40 years defending the truth in old documents, I think I deserve the same standard applied to the truth in my own life. She looked at me for a long moment, then closed the folder gently. "Loretta, there is no indication of cognitive impairment. None. You have excellent recall, strong reasoning, sharp orientation, and impressive executive function." Her tone softened. "You're more organized than half the graduate students I teach." I let out a slow breath. "So I'm not losing my mind." "No," she said firmly. "You are steady, independent, clear." My old age insight settled in right then. Clarity is quieter than confusion. That's why people overlook it. "Dr. Quinn typed up a report while I waited 3 pages long, filled with words like intact, consistent, highly functional. She signed it at the bottom, then handed me a sealed envelope. "This statement," she said, "is unshakable in court and unshakable in any guardianship hearing. Your son cannot override it." I slid the envelope into my bag alongside the legal documents from Marisol. My bag was becoming a fortress ink, and signatures forming layers of protection. As I stood to leave, Dr. Quinn touched my arm gently. "Loretta, whatever pressure you're under, you're handling it with remarkable strength." I smiled. "Well, women my age aren't fragile, doctor. were tempered glass. Walking out into the cold again, the sunlight felt different, brighter somehow, sharper around the edges. Evidence has a way of warming you from the inside out. It doesn't take away the fear, but it replaces it with something sturdier. By the time I reached my car, my quirky fact of the day drifted in studies show that older adults often outperform younger ones in long-term strategic planning, which means Spencer really had no idea what kind of opponent he was creating. I turned the ignition and whispered, "All right, Loretta, legal armor and medical proof. Now you're ready." And for the first time in weeks, I felt not just prepared, I felt unshakable. The morning after Ava finished securing the medical files, the house felt strangely steady, like it had been holding its breath for months, and finally exhaled. I woke up before dawn, the kind of soft blue hour when the world looks barely sketched in. The heater hummed its slow winter rhythm, and I could almost hear Arthur's voice teasing. From years ago, early birds aren't wise. Loretta, they're just restless. Well, restless was exactly what I felt. Because Part 7 wasn't about memory tests or legal stamps anymore. No, this part was about following the money, the oldest trail, the most dangerous one. Ava came downstairs in her thick socks, hair in a loose bun, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Miss Loretta," she said, "I think today we should audit your accounts." Audit. Such a small word, and yet it can collapse a whole family. We sat up at the dining table again, the same table where I once folded Spencer's little t-shirts and ironed his school projects. Now it held printouts, highlighters, and a tiny USB with more power than any raised voice. "Start with the account Spencer helped you reorganize," Ava said. So I pulled out the old brown folder, the one he brought me a year earlier, smiling like a generous son doing a small favor. I opened it, and the smell of old printer ink rose like a warning. The first discrepancy showed up before we even reached page 3, a withdrawal labeled Property Maintenance, External Contractor, $420, then another, then 3 more. Ava frowned. "Do you hire contractors regularly?" "No," I said calmly. "The last contractor who touched this house was Arthur in '96, and he didn't bill me." Ava typed fast. "These withdrawals go straight to his home zip code." Light joke number 1 of the part slipped out without effort. Well, I'm glad something in that boy's life was getting maintained. But underneath the humor was that cold twist in my gut, the one every mother knows the moment you realize your child isn't just careless, they're calculated. A little old-age wisdom surfaced in my mind. You can forgive a spilled glass of milk. You can't forgive the hand that tips it on purpose. We moved to the next stack, auto pays. Tiny trickles of money, each one too small to notice on its own, but together, a quiet river flowing out of my life. Ava whispered, "They started this right after your birthday last year." A birthday gift I hadn't even unwrapped. Lovely. Then we reached the big one, the pension beneficiary page. I'd seen that document 1,000 times in the museum, old women leaving their pensions to grandchildren, husbands leaving theirs to wives. Families passing down what little they had. But never had I seen a switch like this one. The beneficiary wasn't listed as Loretta Myers anymore. Oh no. It said successor on file Spencer Hale. Not illegal, but timed, strategic. Placed exactly 3 weeks before the first conversation they recorded about concerns over Mom's memory. Ava didn't speak. She just quietly pulled a sticky note, wrote the date, and pressed it beside the line like she was tagging an artifact from a shipwreck. "Miss Loretta," she said gently, "this wasn't impulsive. This was built." I nodded slowly. That's the part that scares me least. Because here's the academically debatable phrase for this part. Some scholars argue betrayal doesn't begin with action. It begins with entitlement. Maybe true, maybe not. But as I stared at the number trails, I saw entitlement written in every transaction. We kept going. I opened email logs. He had forwarded my statements to an address I didn't recognize. Mom, billing, review. Cute. As if I were a corporation under audit. Ava opened a second window and cross-referenced login times with Spencer's work schedule. Sure enough, many supportive edits to my accounts were done during lunch breaks and evenings right after he left my house. Light joke number 2 came out dry as winter leaves. Well, at least he didn't steal time from his employer, but inside, my heart felt like thin ice under a heavy boot. Around mid-afternoon, Ava sat back. "Miss Loretta, you could take this to any judge right now." I wasn't ready. Not yet. "Let's trace the pattern fully first," I said. "I want every dollar illuminated. Lies hide in shadows." She nodded and kept working. Then something unexpected. A small deposit, not a withdrawal. A deposit labeled reimbursement, family support. Ava clicked it open. Money from Naomi, not much, barely enough to cover groceries. But it wasn't the amount that mattered. It was the date. It happened right after the day I forgot to turn on the heat. A hush fell over us, because whether intentional or not, that small deposit meant one thing. Naomi had been documenting their financial support to me. A paper trail, a narrative, proof for a case they were building. Light joke number 3 slipped out, but this time it tasted bitter. So they invested in me after all, roughly the price of a supermarket bouquet. Ava didn't laugh. She just reached over and gently covered my hand with hers. "You're not alone," she said softly. For a moment, I felt something warm, something almost like grief, almost like relief. Then I steadied myself. "We finished the trail," I whispered. By dusk, our table looked like a battlefield of facts, highlighted timelines, printed statements, notes in 3 colors. The house was quiet, but not empty. Quiet the way a courtroom is quiet right before the verdict. I packed every page into its respective sleeve. Ava sealed them. I labeled them in my careful archivist's handwriting. Financial evidence. Complete trail, L. Myers. And as I pressed the final label flat, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not fear. Clarity. Clarity is a kind of power no one can take. And tomorrow, that clarity would meet confrontation. By the time morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles, every part of me felt carved into readiness, quiet, precise, like a violin tuned, but not yet played. Part 7 had given me clarity. Part 8 was where clarity met flesh. Ava was already on the porch steps, tying her boots. She looked at me with that mix of worry and admiration only young people can manage. "Miss Loretta," she whispered, "today you don't have to be brave. You just have to be consistent." I gave a soft laugh. Consistency? Honey, that's an old woman's superpower. Old age wisdom of the day, young folks fight with adrenaline. Older women fight with structure, and structure usually wins. While she packed the hard drive into her backpack, I made cinnamon tea, letting the steam warm the cold spot behind my collarbones. For just a moment, the house felt like itself again. Then I heard tires crunch the snow. I didn't panic. I didn't rush. I simply set the teacup down and walked to the living room window. Spencer's car, and Naomi in the passenger seat. Of course. I could almost hear Marisol's voice in my head. They'll come in person when they realize someone else is controlling the narrative. I smoothed my sweater. Ava straightened the stack of files on the counter. Everything was ready. The doorbell rang. Funny thing when fear leaves you, even sound changes. The bell used to jolt me. Now it just chimed, soft as silver. I opened the door. "Mom," Spencer said, breath visible in the cold air. He looked half rehearsed, half rattled. Naomi stepped forward with a smile a little too wide. "We wanted to check on you." "Check on me," the new family hobby. I motioned them in. A quirky fact popped into my mind as I watched them wipe snow from their shoes. Penguins bow to signal trust. Humans smile to signal lies. Not always, of course, but today, clear as sunrise. We sat at the table. "Mom," Spencer began, voice measured like he'd practiced in the rearview mirror. "We're worried. You haven't answered messages. You're isolating yourself." Isolating. How convenient. The very word their guardianship packet had been building toward. I kept my voice warm. "Sweetheart, sometimes quiet is healing, not isolating." A flicker crossed his eyes, maybe annoyance, maybe confusion. Naomi jumped in. "We think it's time to revisit long-term care options. Just a conversation." Ava, standing by the kitchen counter with her laptop open, didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I knew she was recording, not to trap, just to protect. I clasped my hands lightly in front of me. Before we discuss anything, I want to understand why you two think I'm incapable. They exchanged a quick look. Oh, they had prepared something. I could smell it the way a librarian smells mildew in a donated box. No. We've observed things, Spencer said. You've forgotten bills, Naomi added. You left the door unlocked twice. You're confused about dates. You misplaced your keys. I nodded softly, almost encouraging them. Go on. Spencer hesitated. Mom, we just want what's best for you. Light joke number 1 came easy. Well, so does my dentist, but he doesn't try to control my retirement plan. Ava smothered a laugh into her sleeve. I leaned back. Do you know what else I've been doing these past weeks? Their faces went blank. I've been documenting, I said calmly, dates, statements, all changes to my accounts, conversations, proposals. I lifted a single folder from the table, a neat, precise folder labeled in my handwriting, capacity, finances and autonomy verified. Naomi's breath went sharp. Spencer's jaw tightened. Mom, he said quietly, that's unnecessary. Oh, sweetheart, I replied. I think it's finally necessary. I opened the folder and slid a page toward them. My updated capacity certification, signed, stamped, witnessed. Naomi's eyes widened. You got tested. That's right, I said. While you two were busy writing narratives, I was building proof. Light joke number 2 slipped out. You know me, I've always been allergic to fiction. They didn't laugh. I kept going, gentle as a snowfall. And here, I said, sliding another document, is the revocation of all prior powers of attorney. Spencer's lips parted. You revoked? Yes. And here, I added, placing the next page, is the updated will. And before you ask, no, you aren't the executor. The silence grew dense, like the air before a winter storm. Academically debatable phrase of the part floated through my mind. Some sociologists say blood doesn't bind a family, behavior does. I wasn't sure if that was true, but today it felt painfully accurate. Naomi finally whispered, You don't trust us. I rested my palms on the table. Trust is a bridge. Naomi, you two set fire to the wood. Now I'm simply standing on my side. No shouting, no tears. Just truth, quiet and sharp as glass. Spencer swallowed hard. Mom, why didn't you talk to us before doing all this? I smiled gently. Light joke number 3, honey. Every time I tried to talk, I felt like I was speaking into a legal pad. Ava actually snorted. Then I softened my voice. Listen to me carefully. I'm not angry. I'm not broken. I'm not confused. I'm not signing anything not today and not tomorrow and not next year. Their faces stiffened. And I will not ever surrender my autonomy while I am a competent adult living in my own home. The clock ticked loud in the quiet. Finally, Spencer spoke. Mom, I think we should leave. You should, I said kindly. And when you come back, come without paperwork. They stood, slow, heavy, as if they'd aged 10 years in the span of 10 minutes. At the door, Naomi turned. Are you punishing us? I shook my head. No, I'm teaching you something all adults must learn. They waited. Control is not care, I said softly, and love is not guardianship. They left without another word. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly, letting the winter air settle. Ava stepped beside me, eyes shining. Miss Loretta, she whispered, you didn't just stand your ground. You changed the battlefield. I took her hand. No, baby, I just told the truth out loud. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time in a long time, the truth felt like mine again. The house didn't fall silent after Spencer and Naomi left, not the way it had in the old days, when silence felt like abandonment. This time, the silence felt earned, like a courtroom after a verdict, a full breath, a long exhale, a pause in which the world seemed to adjust itself around a new truth. I was no longer stepping back. Ava brewed chamomile tea and set a cup beside me. You okay? She asked softly. Yes, I answered, and not just okay, I'm steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt my spine straighten on its own, not in defiance, in alignment. But part of me knew it wasn't over. People don't just give up control. They retreat, regroup, and return through a side door. Old age insight of the day. The most dangerous storms are the ones that pretend to pass. Sure enough, an hour later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Loretta, this is Rudy Carr. I'd like to speak with you. Privately." Ava leaned over my shoulder. "No way," she whispered. "Is he panicking?" "No," I said quietly. "He's unraveling." I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I took my tea to the back porch. The snow had softened into slush, the kind that squeaks under boots. I stared into the gray sky and remembered something Arthur once told me. When someone who's been hiding things suddenly wants to talk, they aren't confessing. They're negotiating. I went back inside. Ava was tapping away on her laptop, indexing more of the financial timeline. "Ava," I said, "let's prepare a second evidence set, one for legal, one for personal safekeeping." She nodded. "2 backups, triple encryption." "Triple," I said, "and label them plainly. No code names. Clarity scares people more than secrecy." Light joke number 1 slipped in. "Plus, if I drop dead tomorrow, I don't want future historians decoding my filing system." Ava laughed so hard she snorted. While she worked, I powered up the old museum laptop, yes, the clunky one with the sticky F key. That computer was slow, stubborn, and loud as a lawnmower, but it had one advantage: no one under the age of 40 would ever try to hack something that outdated. Quirky fact of the day: some historians keep their notes on floppy disks because no modern hacker bothers with ancient tech. Ridiculous, but true. I opened a clean document and began writing an affidavit in my own voice, something Marisol suggested but never demanded. Affidavit of Intent by Loretta Myers. I wrote slowly, deliberately, letting each line root me deeper into myself. I, Loretta, certify that I understand my finances. I, Loretta, maintain independent judgment. I, Loretta, choose my life. And I, Loretta, revoke all attempts to diminish my autonomy. It wasn't for court. It wasn't for Spencer. It was for me, a grown woman claiming her own name in ink. When I finished, my signature curled at the bottom like it was breathing. Ava glanced over. "That feels powerful." "It feels accurate," I said. Then, just as we began sealing the backup folders, headlights swept across the living room wall. A car stopped outside. Ava froze. "Do you want me to get the door?" "No," I said softly. "He'll come in if he wants to." Sure enough, a knock followed firm, familiar. I wasn't surprised. I opened the door. There stood Rudy Carr, the coat dusted with melting snow, face tired but determined. He looked older than his reputation. His eyes darted past me, searching the house for anger. "Mrs. Myers," he said quietly, "I need to clear my conscience." I didn't step aside. When a man says that, I replied gently, he usually means he wants to lighten his guilt, not my burden. His shoulders sagged. "May I come in?" I let him in. It felt safe. Not because he was harmless, but because I was no longer afraid. Ava stayed in the kitchen, within earshot, laptop glowing like a quiet witness. Rudy removed his gloves slowly. "I stopped representing your son," he said. "This situation was not what I expected." "That's funny," I said. Light joke number 2. Neither was motherhood. He winced. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is the entire file Spencer built," he said. "Drafts, notes, strategies, all of it. You should have it." "I do," I replied. He blinked. "I thought you didn't." "You underestimated me," I said, not unkindly. He lowered his voice. "I owe your husband a debt. He saved my career once. I didn't realize who you were until too late." I studied him. There are apologies born from sincerity and apologies born from fear. His felt like a mixture of both. "Rudy," I said softly, "do you believe I'm incompetent?" He shook his head without hesitation. "No, I believe you're one of the clearest-minded women I've met." "Then why did you help my son?" He swallowed. because he convinced me he was scared for you. And now I'm scared for him. Academic debate phrase of the day slipped in naturally. Some ethicists argue that guilt is merely self-preservation wearing a moral mask. I couldn't decide which side Rudy stood on. Finally, I opened the door again. "Rudy," I said gently, "take care of your conscience. Mine is intact." He nodded, stepped into the cold, and walked back to his car with a heaviness that looked like regret. When he left, Ava breathed out. "Miss Loretta, that man looked like he'd been struck by lightning." "No," I said, "just truth." We returned to the table. The house felt warmer, fuller. Ava sealed the second evidence packet and slid it toward me. "There," she said, "2 complete archives. They can't rewrite anything now." I placed my hand over the box. "No," I whispered, "they can only respond." And as I sat back, letting the lamp's soft glow wrap around us, I felt for the first time not just defended, but prepared. Ready for part 10. Ready for closure. Ready for whatever Spencer might attempt next, because I now held every page of my own story. The morning after Rudy left my porch, the world looked clearer than it had in months, like someone had quietly washed the sky while I slept. The snow had melted into a thin lace of frost, delicate enough to crumble under the lightest touch. Ava made oatmeal with cinnamon and sliced pears. I hadn't tasted pears in years. Funny how sweetness returns when your life stops tasting like fear. While we ate, she said softly, "Miss Loretta, I think today should be the last day, the day you close the file." I nodded, yes, not because the danger is gone, but because I'm done letting it define me. Old age insight of the day. If you let a wound become your identity, you'll bleed forever. We cleaned the dishes together, her drying, me stacking, and for once, the house sounded like a house, not a war room. Around noon, a message came from Spencer. Not long, just a single line. "Mom, can I come by alone?" I stared at it for a few seconds, not with dread, just quiet curiosity, the same way I once read footnotes in a dusty manuscript, trying to understand the writer's state of mind. "Ava," I said gently, "take a break upstairs. I need to do this as a mother." She hesitated. "Call me if you need anything." "I will." She went upstairs with her laptop, and the house returned to its soft hum. Spencer arrived 10 minutes later. No folder, no fake smile, just my son, eyes tired, hair unkempt, shoulders lower than I remembered. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he had permission to step inside. "Come in, sweetheart," I said. He walked slowly to the kitchen table and sank into a chair. It was the same chair he used as a boy, the one with a tiny scratch from when he'd run his toy train over it. He didn't speak for a long time, and I didn't rush him. "Finally," he whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." Not a strategic sorry, not a performative sorry. A sorry that came from the same part of him that once held my hand crossing icy sidewalks. I thought, he started, voice cracking. I thought I was helping. I thought if you slipped, even a little, I had to be ready. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Helping me doesn't mean taking over me. He nodded, eyes wet. I know that now. Naomi and I, we panicked. And panicking made us cruel. I breathed slowly. "Fear makes people do foolish things," I said softly, "but only character decides whether they repair those things afterward." He looked at the stack of organized files on the side table, the evidence, the revocations, the will. "When I saw how prepared you were," he whispered, "I realized how wrong I'd been about you." I let out a small laugh, light joke number 1. "Well, honey, if you underestimate a 65-year-old woman with a label maker, that's on you." He actually smiled through his tears. We talked for a long time, not about documents or the law, but about the years between us, those soft stretches of life where misunderstandings linger until they become something heavier. At one point, he said something that broke my heart and mended it at the same time. "I wasn't scared you'd forget Bill's. Mom, I was scared you'd forget me. That one day I'd come over and you wouldn't know who I was." I reached across the table, touched his hand. "Honey," I said softly, "memory doesn't live in the brain alone. It lives in behavior, and you are a part of mine." He cried then, quietly, head down. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a case study. I felt like a mother. After he calmed, I stood and opened the cabinet drawer, the one where Arthur's letter lived. I took it out and handed it to Spencer. He read the familiar handwriting, the words Arthur once wrote as a warning, a blessing, and a boundary all in one. He pressed the letter to his chest. "Dad trusted you," he murmured. "Yes," I said, "and he trusted you too. He just wanted you to trust me enough to not rush in and fix something that wasn't broken." Light joke number 2, and if I ever do break, I promise you'll hear it loud and clear. He laughed through his tears. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me tighter than I expected. Not a weak hug, not a guilty hug, a hug with weight, with sincerity. Naomi didn't come that day, and I didn't ask for her. Some reconciliations need time. Some need distance. After he left, Ava came downstairs. Her eyes were searching my face. "Well," she whispered. "It's done," I said. "The file is closed." She smiled, relieved. "Then let's archive it." Together, we carried the 2 completed boxes, legal and personal, to the safe. The metal clicked shut, a clean, satisfying sound. I slid the key into its place in the top drawer. Quirky fact of the day: archivists always leave one box slightly unlabeled, so the future has a mystery to solve. In my case, the unlabeled box was simply called Myers, Life. When we finished, Ava hugged me. "You're not just strong," she whispered. "You're structured." Well, I warned you. I said light joke number 3. Retired women with free time become dangerously organized. That night, I made a small dinner, nothing fancy, just roasted vegetables and a soft roll. The house felt warm, peaceful, like a quilt that finally settled flat after months of tugging. Later, I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window overlooking the porch, and wrote the last lines in my journal. You cannot stop people from plotting, but you can refuse to participate in your own undoing. Autonomy is not given, it is claimed. And then, for the academically debatable phrase of the day, I added, some philosophers argue that justice is merely truth-wearing armor. Maybe, maybe not. But today, truth didn't need armor. It simply needed a witness. Ava came back downstairs for a glass of water and paused beside me. "Miss Loretta," she whispered, "what happens tomorrow?" I smiled softly. Tomorrow I live, quietly, kindly, on my own terms. She nodded and went upstairs. I turned off the lamp and let the house fall into its gentle hush. For the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful, rested, mine. When everything finally settled, I found myself sitting in the quiet glow of my living room, watching the shadows dance across the floor, like old memories stretching their limbs. For months, I'd lived in the uneasy space between fear and resolve, building walls out of paper. Evidence, and the kind of truth you only gather when your heart refuses to disappear. And now, as the house breathed in its gentle evening rhythm, I realized I wasn't fighting anymore. I was simply existing again, in the calm way people do when they remember their own worth. I thought about Spencer, his trembling voice, his apology spoken without defense, and I thought about Naomi, carrying her guilt like a fragile cup she didn't know how to set down. I even thought of Rudy, and how a single moment of conscience can change the direction of a life. None of them were villains, just frightened people who forgot that love cannot grow where control takes root. If you asked me what I gained from all this, I tell you it wasn't victory, it was clarity, a reminder that autonomy is not a privilege, it's a birthright, and dignity. Well, dignity is simply the soft light we carry inside us, even when others try to dim it. Now the nights feel gentler, the house feels lived in again, not guarded, and when the wind moves through the porch railings, it sounds less like a warning and more like a lullaby. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: I will meet it standing tall, steady, and entirely myself. Thank you for walking beside me through every breath of this journey. I hope you'll stay for the next story, whenever the quiet evening brings us together again.